So I'm going to introduce our speaker tonight, and Dr. Dennis Crabtree. And Dennis and I go back a long way. The very first time I visited the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory was 30 years ago. And back then, these were in the dark days when I still lived on Turtle Island and was a member of the Vancouver Centre. This is before I saw the light and moved over here and joined the Victoria Centre. And a friend of mine in the Vancouver Centre wanted to talk to Dennis about his work on the at the DAO at the time when you had the Canadian Astronomy Archive. I've just written a whole article about it and I've forgotten the name, you know. So we came up, and that was my introduction to the DAO, to astronomy here, and to Dennis. And so Dennis has had quite a career. He spent much of it here, getting the archive going, which is actually quite an interesting story, which I wrote about recently in the Journal of the RASC. It's still one of only 3 places on Earth that has all the Hubble data, and now it's getting data from all sorts of instruments on Earth and in space, and is quite a center for Canadian astronomy. But Dennis has also, in his career, has also done a lot of work at the Canada, France, Hawaii Telescope and at the Gemini Telescope, and probably a few other places that I haven't thought of. And he was the director of the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory for a time, and now he's retired, but he's actually doing a lot of things like what I do. He's been digging into the history of astronomy in Canada. I remember we had a meeting of Casca in town a few years ago, and there were some great history presentations, one by Dennis, but I think you helped foster some of the other ones. Mm-hmm. And Dennis has been working a lot on the story of John Plaskett, who was the founder of the DAO, and that's going to be the subject of his presentation this evening, the photographic legacy of the DAO and John Stanley Plaskett. So I will hand the meeting over to Dennis, and I'm sure we're going to have a great talk. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, for that introduction. Yeah, 30 years ago, I remember giving that talk at the planetarium in Vancouver.
Okay,
I remember that. Right, so yes, I'm retired, but there's lots of things they say about old astronomers never retire, they just blah, blah, blah. So anyway, here I am. Yeah, so here we have one of the photographs we have up the observatory, and it's not true. Some people may think that is Jim Hesser commuting to work. Not. I test that, so he doesn't quite go back that far.
Well, I thought that was a picture of the last Maple Leaf Stanley Cup parade.
Could be. That could be. That's a good one. So, what did I do? Where's my mouse? I can't see the mouse, so I guess that. Hold on here. Does that do it? Yes. So, John Stanley Plaskett. So, just a little bit quick background. Before Plaskett became an astronomer, when he was hired by the Dominion Observatory in 1903, he was actually, among other things, he worked for the University of Toronto, but he was a recognized amateur astronomer. So he did some of the first experimentation on color photography in Canada. He gave presentations to the Camera Club in Toronto, and then when he moved to Ottawa, he was involved with the Ottawa Camera Club. And my own personal thought is his interest in photography, he wanted to make sure that this construction of the observatory here was well documented. And so he made sure he had someone do that. So that's how we ended up with a nice collection of glass plates. So we have 150 of the glass plates downstairs in the basement, roughly 8 by 10 inches. There's some that are stereographic images, so they're 2 images, special camera with 2 lenses, 2 backs, and you get this parallax effect, so you get 3D images. We have, I don't know, a couple of hundred of cardboard, pieces of cardboard with the left and right images on them, and the old handheld stereoscopic viewer you put up to your head. So yeah, so 3D stuff was high technology back then. It's still high technology. So big question mark in my mind was always who took these construction photos, because it wasn't Plaskett. Come to that. So I'm scanning them at high resolution. Haven't finished them all yet. 2400 DPI. Each image is 800 megabytes in size. And then I bring them over to Photoshop, clean them up, do whatever to make them really good. And then once they're all scanned, I think we're going to send the glass plates to Ottawa for safekeeping. Because once we have good digital images, I think it's important that we make sure that the plates are protected and stored properly. And yeah, so.
What makes you think Ottawa will do that?
No, the Archives of Canada, they'll do a good job. No, I'm not talking about NRC, I'm talking Archives Canada. I've had some experience with archivists in the last several years. They know what they're doing. They care about stuff. They do a good job. So here's a couple. I think these might be taken before construction on the hill started. I know Plaskett, I'm not showing them, but Plaskett himself took several photos on the hill, and he's noted on them house site or building site. So he was scoping out the hill ahead of time where his vision of the observatory, where various buildings might go. So he really was thinking about the whole project. So whether this is at what the former summit of the hill looked like before they leveled it to put the telescope up, I don't know. But yeah, that's the hill. So when Plaskett arrived, the hill was already used by the Natural History Society for outings, because it was a nice location, not easily accessible, by public transit up there. And so anyways, there's an outing of the Natural History Society. There's Plaskett down here, a couple of widows in black in the crowd there. There's another one back there. So, it was already a well-known site, interesting for a little hike up the hill, great views. So it was a well-known site among people in Victoria.
Is there already a road?
No road. I'll come to the road. No road. So here's the road. So this is the road after it was completed. So, over here, here's the hairpin. Okay, people know anybody that's been up the hill knows the hairpin. And if you're not going too fast, you might recognize the rock face here. This wall has crumbled away. There was a nice clean wall there. This over here is the part that's just past the main office building, going up the hill. And again, you can recognize the rock face. Again, it was really nice, smooth sides, rock walls they put together. So the road was the responsibility of the province. That was part of the province's contribution to the project. The province contributed $10,000 to buy the land, and they agreed to build the road. So the road wasn't built until 1915. So here's the people working at the top of the hill. This one has not been cleaned up, as you can tell. So there a lot of handwork, smashing up rocks, moving things by hand. There's a water tower there. I'll come to what the water tower is about. Because their machinery was steam operated. So here you see the boiler, firewood to fire up heat the boiler, get steam. I don't know what this machine is exactly. Maybe it's drilling or, I don't know. Anyways, it was a lot of work, but they had lots of people. And I think that might be the White House, as we call it now, in the background. So that house was intended as a house for workers during the construction period. It was never meant to be the director's house. Plaskett had a vision for a much grander house that would be the director's house, but there was no money. So he ended up slumming it for his time as director in the White House. His house in Ottawa was much nicer when he was working for the Dominion Observatory. Here's the pier under construction. You know, they doing concrete like we do now, wooden forms. A lot of these pictures, whether it's this pier, the telescope, the dome, you always see men up high on places. This guy down here. And you can tell it's taken in the late afternoon. There's a shadow of this fellow here. And then you can see the shadow of this fellow as well. So this was taken late afternoon, probably, you know, late summer, early fall of 1915 is my guess. So Warner and Swayze in Cleveland were the people who built the dome and the telescope structure. And here's a picture of the factory floor, all the lathes and everything, all belt operated. And this is the model that we have of the dome and telescope that sits in the center of the universe now. This was built by Warner and Swayze in their factory. It appeared in the 1915 Panama Exposition in San Francisco. So originally this was somewhere in Ottawa and didn't come to Victoria until 1955. So, yeah, there it is. Been around for a long time. Longer than the telescope has, actually. So here is the construction of the skeleton of the dome in Cleveland. I mean, something big like that, you do a test construction of the site where you're building, you know, getting the pieces fabricated. So this is a test construction of the dome. Here we have on the left, Plaskett, Ambrose Swayze, and I forget who this fellow is. It's not Warner, but it's there's Swayze. It's winter time, I think you can tell there. Here's a test construction of the telescope structure, polar axes, piers, everything. So that's not in the dome. That was done in Cleveland again. Then the pieces were all shipped to Victoria. Here's the polar axis being brought by horse-drawn wagon up Douglas Street. This is just across from Mayfair Mall, Mayfair Meat Market. Love the that's telephone number is 2260. Can everybody remember that? 4 digits. I guess King was the owner of the Maywood Meat Market. Here we have the polar axis continue its voyage up Glanford Avenue. You can see motor vehicles in the distance here. And here we have 2, 4, 6, 8 eight horses to take the polar axis. Quite the voyage. And then here we have the dome being constructed on top of the hill. Down here you can see the double-walled outer walls of the dome through there. Here we have the structure of the dome. Here it is more complete. And these are just a few of the several images that we have. And the detail, when you scan these at high resolution, and I'm cleaning them up of everything, and boy, you can zoom in, you can see a lot of detail. And one of them, as I'm working on it, I look, and there's a crescent wrench on the floor of the dome. And so that got me, well, when was the crescent wrench invented? Anybody want to hazard a guess? 1907, by a Swedish engineer living in the US. So before that, it was just fixed size wrenches.
Can I ask you about the one side of the polar axis, which is
Yeah.
it was formed concrete on the site. That would have to be done very precisely.
Well, it had adjustments there was adjustments, at the top there when you attach the telescope to the pier. There are adjustments, and Plaskett himself came out to do those adjustments to make sure that it was right. But yeah, it had to be pretty close.
It must be, yeah, but it's unusual. It would have been unusual at that time to build.
I think so. Yeah, precision concrete pouring probably was not a thing. Yeah, that's a good point. And here we have the telescope tube being brought up the hill. I'm not sure what this guy's doing. I don't think he's helping much by pushing, but I don't know. Maybe he's keeping it from sliding off the back. But yeah, it was, when you think about, most people have seen a telescope. There's a lot of stuff there. It's massive. And all that was brought up by horse wagon up the hill from the harbor. Here we have, we're getting closer to completion, and the polar axis being installed. Here it is, more complete. And I tell people it was the IKEA telescope, because all the parts, when they came from Warner and Swayze, had numbers. Say number 82, number 92. So I could just see them opening up the sheet of instructions, attach the bolts numbered 1 through 8 into part number 2 or something, but anyway, all the parts have numbers on them.
Did they need an Allen wrench?
I don't know. That wasn't included. That was, yeah.
Were the instructions in Chinese?
So the fellow sitting here is Thomas Tennant Hutchinson. So he was hired during the construction. I don't know what his job was during the construction, but he kept on after the observatory opened. He was, one of the things he did was night assistant, helped the people observing at night, but he's also the guy who kept the telescope running, fixing problems and doing various things. Yeah. And this famous picture, there's actually more than one version of this we have. But anyways, this is October 21st, 1916, the date that Plaskett invited members of the RASC and other local people up to see the telescope move. Everything was installed except the mirror. So you can look on the back, there's no spectrograph, right? So the mirror has not been installed yet. And he wanted to show them the telescope move. It must have been quite impressive to see a telescope that size move, telescope dome turn, shutters open. It was, even without the mirror, it was a pretty impressive piece of machinery.
Still is impressive.
Yes. This fellow here is Dennison. He was head of the Weather Observatory in Victoria. And this fellow here is Arthur Williams McCurdy. McCurdy was Alexander Graham Bell's secretary, private secretary. He helped him purchase land in Nova Scotia. And he moved out to Victoria. And I think he was the guy that introduced Plaskett to the Premier of BC and helped arrange the agreement where the province would help support the telescope. So McCurdy built a house up on the Malahat. It was overlooking Finlayson Arm. His son was the first person to fly a powered plane in Canada, the Silver Dart, which was a project funded by Alexander Graham Bell. And McCurdy's son went on to be Lieutenant Governor of Nova Scotia. So there's, I don't know, I mean, all these people have stories, but we don't know many of them, if any of them, except a few of them. So. And then there we have the final telescope, nice and clean looking. There we have the two clocks that are now in the CU. There's a calendar there from the Canadian Commerce Bank or something. I think that's the mirror for the Newtonian focus. Here you can see the mirror is wrapped in a blanket because, again, Plaskett, they discovered that the temperature changes during the nighttime or day to night were changing the shape of the mirror a bit more than they wanted. So they tried insulating the telescope, putting this blanket around it. Yeah. And the thing is, this was the JWST of its time. biggest operating telescope, most advanced technology. Unlike JWST, it was used by 2 astronomers. There were 2 astronomers on staff. Yes?
Is that showing a spectroscope on it right there?
Yeah, that's the spectrograph on the back here, yeah.
Another question is, what sort of drive energy did they use originally?
Drive, it was a weight that fell, a clock drive. So it was this massive weight. It would use electric motor to wind it up, and then it was tension so that when the brake was released, it just fell just at the right speed to move the telescope to track the stars. When it got down to the bottom floor, they'd have to rewind it up and yeah. There's what the inside of the director's house looked. I'm going to guess circa 1920. There are chairs that don't look terribly comfortable. Dining room. Whether that was radio or something else, I don't know. Probably not radio at that time. Oh, definitely not radio. Anyways, well, we have the inside of the director's house. Looks a little different now, of course. They did other pictures as well. So in there is this picture on the left. And I think this was taken out at Deep Cove, which was the terminus of the BC Electric Railway that ran across the foot of the hill. Its terminus was Deep Cove, and right where the Deep Cove Chalet is right now. I posted this picture on our Old Victoria Facebook page saying this is probably taken in 1914, and it caused so much discussion. Women didn't dress like that back then. This is from the 60s or the 70s, or anyways, there was a couple of hundred board comments and things. These are competitive swimmers, so they were, yeah, this is how the costumes they wore. They're part of a swimming club, and this is their, I don't know, matron or whatever. Okay, on the right here, I took this image and using generative AI, made it into a Japanese print, and that's, so that's. So who took these construction photos? I'm not sure about the ones, you know, at the Warner and Swayze factory, but who took them? Now you're asking, why is he showing this ship, his yacht? Well, I'll get to that. So Dorothy, 30-foot sailboat yacht built by John J. Robinson. His boat building location was where the Laurel Point Inn is right now. He was quite well known for building sealing boats and other boats, and this was one of the fastest racing yachts around at the time. It's been restored. It's up in Ladysmith. It wasn't Ladysmith Harbor. I'm not going to go into a whole story about that. And it just won an award as the best restored sailing vessel under 40 feet this year. Won the award, worldwide award for that. So remember his name, John J. Robinson. I'm not crazy. I tell you, I'm not crazy. So here we have another one of our photos. So on the left here, we see West Saanich Road, all the same curves. There's the observatory up there. And here we have this car. And I'd seen this picture for a couple of years, and then it dawned on me, wait a minute, that is the photographer's car.
Yes.
So I zoomed in, and you can see he's driving, it's a right-hand drive. So this was taken before 1922. January 1st, 1922 is when Victoria switched from driving on the left to driving on the right. So I see a license plate number 4124. Okay, so that gives a clue. Who is this? Well, somebody, it turns out, has digitized all the BC automobile registration books from 1904 when people had to get their cars registered. And they're on a website called BCPL number 8S, bcplates.ca or something. And there we go, 4124, a Willys Overland, E. Fleming. Okay, go to the 1916 or 17 street directory, Edgar Fleming, photographer. And there's Harold Fleming, photographer. Okay, well, it turns out Edgar and Harold are brothers, came to Victoria in 1888 from London, and they set up a photography business. Somewhere around 1916 or whatever happened, they separated and went their own ways. But it was Edgar Fleming was the guy who took the photos. I'm pretty sure he took most of these construction photos. So they lived in Esquimalt. People might know Fleming Bay or Fleming Beach, pardon me. That's named after Fleming's. So what's the connection to the boat? Here we have a marriage license. Edgar Fleming marrying Catherine Robinson. Her father is John J. Robinson. So Edgar Fleming's wife was the daughter of John J. Robinson, who built Dorothy. And I made the connection to Dorothy through Edgar Fleming's great-granddaughter who lives up in Nanaimo or Ladysmith. So I've been exchanging email with her. So that's the connection to Dorothy.
Good sleuthing.
It's amazing what you can find online. It's amazing. Oh, another thing about Edgar Fleming, there's a few pictures of his in the archives in Britain, including this one of Her Majesty Queen Victoria wearing crown on widow's cap. Small three-quarter face looking toward her right. It's not digitized, so I don't see it, but here it is, Edgar Fleming. And when you look at the 1881 census, which is the last one he was in England before coming to Canada, this is where he lived, Norwood Villa. So he has taken, the guy who photographed the construction of the observatory has a portrait of Queen Victoria in the archives in England. You should look him up because he did a lot of photography up of First Nations, up island and everything. He's quite, and there's a lot of his photos, portraits of well-known Victorians in the archives. I went down there and looked at them all to see if there might be one of Plaskett, but there isn't, so, oh well. And then here he is in 1932, he was still around. He took this picture of the people at the observatory in 1932. So we have John Stanley Plaskett here. We have his wife, Reba. Joseph Algernon Pierce, his wife there. Here is Helen Sawyer Hogg. And I believe that's her husband there, Frank Hogg, or maybe him. I think this guy, Frank. Ed Harper, who became director after Plaskett. And when he died in 1940, Joseph Algernon Pierce became director. Now, the occasion of this photograph is, this is the visit by the Astronomer Royal, whose name escapes me at the moment. Anyway, there was some eclipse trip and they were back and they stopped in Victoria. And this period here, excuse me, is the occasion of the great crying baby story that's associated with the observatory. So during Dyson's visit, I think it might have been Plaskett or it might have been Pierce, took him up the telescope at night to see the world's second largest telescope in operation. And as they're climbing those stairs to go up to the observing floor, they hear a baby crying. And they look at each other, and then a voice yells up from above, a woman's voice, "Frank, change the baby and send up more plates." Helen Sawyer Hogg was observing at Newtonian focus while her husband, Frank, was looking after their fairly young child named Sally. And he was responsible for looking after Sally and sending up more plates when Helen needed to take more exposures. So that is the crying baby story.
That's fantastic.
So a bit more about Plaskett. Here he is. This is the book, a lecture he gave on orthochromatic photography given to the Canadian Institute in 1901. He gave talks at the Toronto Camera Club as well. So he took his camera on him with several trips between, I'm sure more than this, but the photographs we have at the observatory cover the period between 1910 and 1914. And many envelopes of negatives and prints were discovered up there. I discovered them. And some of them were even in cardboard envelopes from Edgar Fleming, photographer. So Plaskett took his film to Fleming to be developed and printed. So these again have all been digitized, and I'm again cleaning them up in Photoshop. So let's start 1910. So in August of 1910, there was a meeting of the Astronomy and Astrophysical Society of America at the Harvard Observatory. So this is a picture Plaskett took of Harvard Observatory. AASA was the precursor to what is now the American Astronomical Society. Now, later in August, there was a meeting in Pasadena of the Solar Union on Cooperation or something, I forget the exact name. And Plaskett and many others went to that meeting as well. So how did they get there? Well, they didn't fly, they took the train. So a bunch of these astronomers were all on the train together for several days. And what did they do? They talked. But they did a little bit of sightseeing as well. So we have pictures of Plaskett when he was at the Grand Canyon. We have, I think, evidence that he actually got to the bottom of the Grand Canyon. This is probably the river. What's the river? What's the river that goes through the Grand Canyon? Colorado. Colorado, thank you. Here they are getting off the train, some of the astronomers. And here we have Indians in Arizona or New Mexico selling pottery. So yeah, they traveled by train and much more time to talk and more time to do various explorations. Here we are in Pasadena. So these palm trees must have been quite the thing for Plaskett to see. Here we have people at any conference, they mill around and they might even get ready for the group photo. No, actually this is the group photo here. People are getting ready for the group photo. I found online an actual group photo of the meeting and it's the same setting except people are all looking at the camera. And then here people are on a side of a hill talking. I think this one is at up at Mount Wilson. I think all these are at Mount Wilson. This one's down in Pasadena.
I have a question on the top left photo here.
This one here?
On the building, it looks like there's a fabric membrane.
Yes, it does, doesn't it? Yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah, there is. Yeah. I know it's not solar panels. Okay, so 1911. Okay, we'll go back here. So 1910 in Pasadena, this is where Plaskett first got the idea that Canada needed a bigger telescope. Other observatory directors were there. They were getting spectra, doing the radial velocities of stars. And they came up with a scheme whereby the work would be divvied up so that people didn't duplicate getting data on the same star. So different observatories, depending on how big the telescopes were, they would get the fainter stars, blah, blah, blah. So, but this is the idea where the time when Plaskett came up with the idea that Canada needed a big new telescope so it could fully participate in this cooperative work. So he invited people for the 1911 AAS meeting to be in Ottawa and Wakefield, Quebec. So they took a train to Wakefield. Here's the rail. There's a view from a hill outside Wakefield looking at the river, town as it existed back then. A few more pictures from there. Here they are waiting to leave. Just comfortably sitting around on the hillside, talking. You see lots of women there, right? So I think some of these are probably some of the women from Harvard Observatory. I need to go through and identify people. This fellow over here is Pickering. And anyways, at some point I will try and identify these people. And then they're joking around, right? This guy wants to have a fight with Plaskett taking his picture. So very much more civilized meeting and time frame, and they interacted on a more, I don't know, just very different than the way meetings work today.
No pyramids?
No which?
Pyramids?
What do you mean, why pyramids?
They have these pyramids at GAs, or they used to.
Well, did they?
Human pyramids.
Oh, no. Oh, maybe. That's interesting. So in 1913, Plaskett went on a really long European trip. He went to England, but he also went to Germany and other parts. So here we are at some, I've identified this place, some German hotel. There's his wife, good friends of the Plasketts. I forget their names at the moment. Here they are in a touring car. Nice extra spare tire there. They toured various parts. So Plaskett spent some time in England. So this is York. It's actually kind of fun trying to identify where these photos are taken because there's no information. So this one, there's this arch here that's got the name of the old something inn or whatever. So you Google that and you find out, oh, it's York, and that's York Minster in the background. So I was there last year, and I got a picture very similar to this. This arch has been updated. There's ones in Edinburgh, there's ones in Chester, various cities. I don't know where this one is. I haven't looked at that one. I guess we know this one's in London somewhere. And it's interesting, he's got a picture taken in London of Westminster Bridge and the Parliament, but it doesn't include Big Ben. Like, I thought as a tourist, that's what you would do, take a picture of Big Ben. And then another river scene, I'm not sure where that is. Okay, now we have a couple of observatories in Europe. Again, I kind of know where these are, but I don't remember. But they're very distinctive with their domes. This might be actually not being right. It was in that envelope, but it almost, anyways. So this image is taken up in the land of Plaskett, up in the Lake District in England, right near Keswick. This is the Derwent water. I said it to this relative of Plaskett's, and she lives in Keswick, and she said, yeah, that's Derwent. And then this one, somewhere over here above this doorway or whatever, there was some words, something yard. So anyways, it turns out it's in Penrith. So Plaskett's ancestors, his father was born in St. Croix, the West Indies, because Plaskett's, a bunch of them moved there in 1810 and owned plantations and were managers of plantations. And when the slaves were freed, Plaskett's grandfather and father family moved back to England. And from the census records, they stayed in Penrith. In here, behind here, there's housing in behind here. So obviously Plaskett knew this story from his father about where the family had lived in 1850 or so, before they came to Canada. And he went back there and he took a picture. If you go on Google Street View, it looks very similar today. Hasn't changed much. So there's a lot of information on these photos. You got to look at the details, but there's a lot of information you can glean from them. Now, another big trip Plaskett did in 1913 was he came west to Victoria, but I think he might have also later gone down to California. But he traveled from Ottawa by train, and he was met in Toronto by his friend Augusta Chant here, who is head of astronomy at University of Toronto. So this is outside Union Station. So the sites they were looking at for the telescope that ended up here were Lethbridge, somewhere near Banff in the Rockies, Penticton, and Victoria. So Plaskett stopped at each of these sites on his 1913 trip. Later, 1913, W. Harper actually did a site survey, came and spent time at each site with the telescope, getting basic measurements as to image quality, the clarity, the clearness of the skies, temperatures, all that kind of stuff. So this is Lethbridge in 1913. I think that bridge is still there. Can't say I've been to Lethbridge. Went through the Rockies. Got some great pictures of the Rockies. Steam trains going along, tracks. Sort of March, April, so there's still lots of snow around. This sign back here, there's a sign there, it points to Mount Stephen. So again, you can see, he's got quite a few cool pictures of the Rockies. And then he went to the Shuswap. This is another CP hotel that was on Lake Shuswap. So again, the CP built the railway, and they put big hotels for tourism, like the Empress and Banff Springs Hotel, etc. So we stay, here's downtown Penticton in 1913, taken from the top of Mount Campbell, which is just east of downtown Penticton, and that was a potential site. This is up in Summerland. Plaskett's sister was married to a guy named Fraser, who was head of the fruit processing plant in Penticton. And the head of the Fruit Growing Association, his name, this was his house here. So something else about Summerland. Who knows, I mean, people must know the poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee. Famous poem. Well, Sam McGee was a real person. He was up in the Yukon, and that's where he got his name into this poem. When he left the Yukon, he went down to Summerland and bought an orchard. And after that, he left Summerland and went to somewhere in Saskatchewan where he died. There's a street named after McGee in Summerland. And when he went to Saskatchewan, when he died, he was buried, not cremated. Yeah. So this might be Plaskett's sister. I don't know. I just don't know. But he's there with this woman. Again, this is looking over towards Lake Okanagan back here. So they lived in Penticton, but then they moved to Osoyoos. So when his sister Annie Josephine Plaskett, and her husband Fraser, the family, they raised the population of Osoyoos to 17. And one of their children was born in south of the border, because that was closer to going to a hospital than going to Penticton. And there's a story written up in the Osoyoos archives of one of their children being bitten by a rattlesnake. And she clubbed the rattlesnake to death and went to start the car and go into the hospital, and it wouldn't start, so a neighbor gave her a ride on his horse, and they did the standard thing of cleaning the wound and whatever. But it's written up in the archive. So there's several Plasketts still up in the Okanagan, by the way. So here we have some in Victoria, taken from the top of the hill. This was taken by Prospect Lake, a schoolhouse being built there, and this is another view of Observatory Hill in the background. This one is taken from the legislature of the Inner Harbor, and the perspective tells me it wasn't taken from the steps, it's up higher, so it was taken from somewhere inside the legislature. So I like to think Plaskett took this when he was visiting with the Premier and went to the window and took the picture.
There's a porch up there too.
Oh, there is? Oh, okay. Maybe that was it then. This is the original CPR steamship building. This is the James Bay Recreation Club or something, I forget. Okay, this one.
Do you recognize that tree on the right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is the sequoia. Same tree. Yeah, same tree. A lot smaller, a little more symmetrical back then. Okay, this one. All right, nice view of Finlayson Arm. Okay, so a few years ago, Richard Pierce, over here. Raise your hand, Richard. Richard is the son of Joseph Algernon Pierce. Richard spent 11 years growing up on top of the Observatory Hill in the director's house. Anyway, he and I visited Jane Shapley, thank you. Jane is Arthur Williams McCarty granddaughter, and she lives in the house that McCurdy built, and up there on overlooking. It's right on the edge. Really is on the edge. Beautiful views. It's a beautiful wooden house. It's just great. Anyways, I got up there and I see these stumps, and I knew where this photo was taken now because I didn't know, right? It's up somewhere up on the Malahat, but it was taken when Plaskett was visiting McCurdy, because that's where his house is. So, and Shapley is kind of related to the famous Harlow Shapley, the astronomer. And when this guy, I forget his name now, but he was growing up, he asked his mother about the astronomer Shapley, and his mother said, "We don't talk about him, he's too pink." He was a very left-leaning person, politically. He's too pink. Thank you. That's it. One more slide here though. Next Thursday, the Digital Museums Canada will be launching a website that we put together, Science, National and Civic Identity and Tourism at the Dominion Astrophysical Observatory. This website was based on Dan Posey's thesis, and I did most of the work, but I had help with writing from Dan and Don Moffat. So anyways, it will be launched May 16th, and stay tuned for the URLs.